Good morning. I would like to welcome you all to this second day of the 3A conference on availability, accessibility, and affordability of medicines and medical devices that we are organizing under the Portuguese presidency of the European Union. I'm very pleased that we can dedicate this second day to the topic of affordability, which is a topic that encompasses so many dimensions, and also considering the interlinking between EU responsibilities and the national competencies of the member states. Of course, when we are talking about affordability, means that's also have to look into all policies that are deriving into the health systems. Of course, also in this topic was also brought forward by the pandemics, and the number of both perhaps strengths and weaknesses have been highlighted by the current situation that we are living. We also know that there are a number of initiatives at international level that address this issue, namely discussions that are taking place in connection with WHO. Also, in the Portuguese presidency, we have already taken some initiatives, particularly the meeting that we have held with the network of national competent authorities of pricing and reimbursement, where we started discussing the challenges that we are all facing, and particularly to look into better ways of reinforcing our cooperation, and perhaps even to restructure this cooperation in relation to these issues. These are some of the ongoing activities which I'm sure will be present in the debates that we will take, that will be having this morning. Of course, very importantly, the recent pharmaceutical strategy that the European Commission has presented at the end of last year also brings this topic forward, putting this in a wider context, so highlighting the need for a more holistic approach in terms of linking the different aspects that we have discussed also yesterday in relation to availability and accessibility in connection with affordability. This will be one of the topics that we'll have this morning. So I will not wish to take too much more time. So following on the discussions that we had yesterday, as I said, we will devote this morning to the affordability issues. We will start now with a number of presentations before we move into a round table, which will that I will introduce at the end of this session, and I would like to start with the presentations that we have scheduled for this initial part of the morning. So I will present them all in sequence. So we'll start the presentation by Sylvain Giraud from the European Commission. You will talk on developing an affordability agenda under the pharmaceutical strategy for Europe to keep the sustainability of health systems. Then we will continue with Pedro Pita Barros from the Nova Business School in Lisbon. And Pedro will present the topic effective ways of investing in health and patient access. Then we will finalize this three set of presentations with Francisco Ramos from the Portuguese School of Public Health that will address the topic on the sustainability of healthcare systems. What costs, what value? At the end of the presentations, We will have a 15 minutes period for questions and answers, and I hope we can have still some discussion. I hope that Sylvain is ready, so I would start with giving the floor to Sylvain Giroux, and I will just refer that Sylvain is the head of unit of medical products, quality, safety and innovation in DG Santé at the European Commission, a unit which is in charge of EU level policy developments and particularly the implementation of EU legislation and also the pharmaceutical strategy. Sylvain, thank you very much for being with us, and the floor is yours.
Bon dia, good morning. Thank you, Rui. Thank you very much. Can you hear me well?
Yes, very well. Go ahead.
Thank you. So I'm very grateful to the Presidency for inviting me to contribute to this very important conversation. And as you were saying yourself, this, of course, this session that we're starting now this morning on affordability links very powerfully with the other sessions and the other concept of availability and accessibility that were discussed yesterday. And let me just maybe refer in that context to a quote or to what the Commissioner said yesterday at the start of this conference when she took the floor in the opening session. She said, accessibility, availability, and affordability are the basic filters through which to ensure that the EU pharma system is conducive to innovation that addresses the real and actual needs of patients, professionals, and health systems. I think we have here what you were talking about when you talked about the need for a holistic approach. You yourself yesterday also, I noted an interesting mention you made at the start of the first session when you said it is very important that we be looking at these three concepts together. And you said, I think very rightly, that these three A's trinity need to be developed in a balanced way. So it's really with this in mind that I'd like to take you through what is starting to or continuing to develop and shape at EU level in the form of what we could now call, I believe, an agenda on affordability at EU level. So it has to start with a diagnostic of what the situation is. And this diagnostic, this analysis, we have tried to contribute to it in the pharmaceutical strategy for Europe, where we have put together a certain number of elements of challenges that are not new and that had already been highlighted, including in high-level discussions in the EU context at ministerial level, and quite importantly, for example, as early as 2016 under the Dutch presidency, and the Council conclusions that were adopted there, where a lot of the issues that we've been discussing yesterday and today were already highlighted, and in a way they started, this was an important milestone that is also part of the journey that we are continuing with this conference today, the pharma strategy and the follow-up to this. So just to say that the issues that the strategy highlights in terms of challenges, they're not new, they have been on the table, they've been discussed. We just try to put them together again in a way that we can start from there to propose further action. So affordability, what do we mean? We mean that the system as it currently is and the pharmaceutical policy has implications for both public and household finances. We mean that the business model, the way it is developed and the way it's changing is moving from selling blockbusters to marketing niche busters. We mean that more and more products that are coming on the market are priced even higher and higher, with sometimes growing uncertainty as to their real-life effectiveness and the adequation between price and effectiveness, and price and cost are becoming uncertain and unclear. The same in terms of the transparency of costing and costing principles. What do we then mean by sustainability of health systems? We mean that, sorry, I think I missed a slide in the meantime. Okay, sorry. Yeah, I missed a slide here. But anyway, what I wanted to tell you is that the next speakers, Pedro and Francisco, are much better qualified than I am to give you information and facts about this, and I'm sure they will. But what I wanted to tell you is that we're seeing sustainability of health systems across the EU as a growing challenge for most member states. The budgetary sustainability of health system is at risk. Of course, it's not only because of pharmaceutical expenditure. It's a much more bigger issue with the sustainability of health systems. But this is one of the area where spending is important, where expenditure are important, and where they are actually growing and the pharmaceutical budget account for about 20 to 30% of hospital expenditure, and sometimes they are not very visible in the way the accounting is taking place, and they're not separately reported as separately from the hospital expenditure generally. So there is while there is some uncertainty as to the level, there is a clear understanding that this is becoming a more and more a burden for health systems, and something that the authorities in charge of budgeting, pricing, reimbursing, and paying for the health systems have been also saying for many years now. One of the challenges also that is being highlighted is that some of the features of our system creates market barriers and limits competition in a way that does not allow for price reduction due to or price savings that would hopefully be coming from a more competitive functioning of the market. So we're saying all this in the pharma strategy. We are making this diagnostic, which again, as I said, is not very new. And then what does the strategy proposes? It proposes first, and this is part of the other aspects in relation to the revision of the legislation, it proposes to revise the legislation. It proposes to look at how the legislation and the regulatory framework has consequences that impede the competitive functioning of the market, and proposes that to look when revising the legislation to take into account of market effects impacting affordability. It says that we should take into account the relationship with intellectual property rights, the system of incentives, of obligations, and we should support innovation, access, and affordability in a sort of holistic way, looking at how there is a possibility to achieve this together as opposed to through trade-offs. And it says that we should, when revising the legislation, also address market competition considerations, in particular for generic and biosimilar medicines. This first part of the recommendation made by the strategy is relating to the legislative framework. There is a second set of action that are proposed in the strategy. There are those relating to cooperation, and this is also what we earlier on referred to the group of competent authorities in charge of pricing, reimbursement, and public health care payer. This group is not new. It has existed as a network for several years. It's been involved in many discussions. And what the strategy offers is an opportunity to boost this work and to get it hopefully into new directions or a more concrete work. So this is what we would want, what we want to do. When I say we, I mean we, the Commission, of course, but very much also the competent authorities themselves that have expressed also their interest to be working along these lines. And actually, since the beginning of 2020, we've had several meetings with a view to the preparation of the strategy with those authorities to discuss how they would see this this process. And in fact, this new momentum that the strategy brings has come to the idea around three words that we need to develop the work in this group: stability, continuity, and concreteness. So the strategy proposes to develop that cooperation, to base this cooperation on mutual learning and best practice exchanges, to look at pricing, payment, and procurement policies, and to improve the affordability and cost effectiveness of medicines and health system sustainability. So this is a little bit the mandate, which is very general and quite consensual. Of course, the whole process needs to recognize very strongly that this is an area of national competence, and this is why that it is about mutual learning. It is about developing cooperation and tools that serve the national policy making. The other dimension of the reboosting this group is also to provide these authorities for a forum, a place where they can express their views, their voice as a group, and has authorities that have legitimate responsibilities in the pharmaceutical system, and that are also able to make that point of view heard across the system in complementarity with other such structures and administrative groups in the EU system, the Pharmaceutical Committee, for example, the HMA or others. Of course, the structure in each of the member states is different in a way that some of these issues are more integrated than in certain countries than in others. So what? So I talked about continuity, stability, concrete actions. Let me just say briefly that by continuity, we need a long-term agenda. We need continuity across presidencies. By stability, we mean a sort of structured membership with clear authorities that need to be involved, but of course also the possibility for flexible opening and reaching out to other groups. And by concrete action, we mean that the action plan and the rolling agenda needs to go into developing tools, developing support actions that do truly help national policy making. So this, the Commission is ready and has already done that, support the boosting of the group. And of course, we also see a very strong role for the presidencies, the trio presidencies, the rolling trio in the steering of the work. So now I have two slides that I will not go into details, but they basically are trying to, they have been discussed in the group in several meetings, trying to identify priorities. This first slide is the type of action that could be developed. So this is very much a menu of actions that could be developed, a toolbox for tools that could be used. There are many different ways to take the discussion forward, from, of course, a lot of discussions and scoping issues to studies, to workshops, to specific actions, to EU for Health EU for Health financed projects, specific working together into guidelines, guideline documents. There are many different issues, and also of course, databases, sharing data, etc. So some of the work has started on using some of these boxes. And this second slide here is also a kind of menu. You can't probably see most of it, but it's just to show you how the group has progressed in establishing, based on the strategy and earlier discussion, the different policy areas, the different subjects, the different issues that they could be looking at. They have been here grouped into three blocks: evidence for action, exchange on pricing, payment and procurement policy, and market entry and competition aspects. And for each of them, there are different ideas. It's not that we're going to do everything and that we're going to do it now, but we need to establish this long-term agenda, and we have started to be looking at certain issues since the beginning of the year, and this has to be a road towards developing this agenda, taking us through different meetings. We have already, since the beginning of the year, have several workshops focusing on the revision of the legislation and its affordability aspects. Also looking at data sharing and how we can reinforce and develop new data sharing between authorities. We've also been looking at how the payers can get involved and can benefit from real-world evidence. We saw several issues that have been taking the form of plenary meetings organized with the presidency, smaller meetings organized by the Commission, workshops and specific informal discussion. And progressively, we hope that on the way to the next meeting of the group that is planned for the 17th of June, we will be able to develop further this long-term agenda based on stability, continuity, and concrete actions. Thank you very much, Rui. I'm happy to come back if there are questions later. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sylvain. Thank you very much for this presentation and for highlighting clearly the importance of developing a common agenda that can be for the benefit of all of us together. So we'll come certainly to some discussion at the end. I would now like to invite Pedro Pita Barros to make his presentation. As I said, Pedro is the professor of health economics at the Nova School of Business and Economics in Lisbon, and he's also a member of the European Commission's expert panel on effective ways of investing in health, besides many other responsibilities. Pedro will certainly also talk about the future, so in relation to the effective ways of investing in health, and I'm sure he will provide us with ideas to address these issues. Pedro, the floor is yours. Once again, thank you very much for being with us in our conference.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Rui, for the nice introduction, and just want to say hello also to Sylvain and to Francisco, who are together on this session. It's a pleasure to be with all of you again. Now, the topic that I decided to address, it has a general title, but it fits the general principles of this session. But I'm going actually to focus much more on a key issue that will be payment mechanisms for new products. Next slide, please. But before I do so, can you just move to the next slide, or? Yeah, okay, thank you. But before I do so, let me just express that what I'm going to say here today, it's basically my own views. It is based on a report by the expert panel, which is an independent group established by the European Commission, and Sylvain in the past has participated in some of our discussions. He knows the work that we do. I will be based on this document that I invite you to read if you have anything else to say or comments to provide. Some of you probably have already done it in the past, but I'm going to build on it and give my own views since we have produced this document. So what will be the key issues that I want to address? I think the basic point that I want to have, and I like to have my head clear about what I'm dealing with before usually I start thinking too much of it. It's to think, what is the basic problem that we face here? So what makes it a problem? And essentially, when you talk about new products, and it's where the higher prices are coming from, you basically have three objectives. You have a kind of what we may call the triple aim. You want to provide quick patient access. You want to provide incentives for innovation that matters. That was mentioned already in the introduction that was discussed yesterday. And you want to make it affordable to healthcare payers, as it was discussed already slightly this morning. Now, the critical element from from my side of view, from an economist point of view, is that when we look on these three aims, you actually have different implications from those. So when we talk about quick patient access, you have two main barriers. You have regulatory time approval. I'm not going to deal with it here now, but we also have the introduction decision by companies. And of course, quick patient access tends to be favored by high prices if you look on the decision side of the companies. So you may want to have high prices to have quicker patient access. But if you want to provide incentives for innovation that matters, what really matters is that you have relative price differentials. That you don't need to think about what is the absolute value of prices to get incentives. You just need to get better innovation to receive a better price. And that's a relative value statement. It's not an absolute implication on prices. And the third one is that you want to be affordable to healthcare payers. So this is obviously a target that is favored by low prices. And so each target that you have here requires a different movement in prices. And they will be contradictory. And so then you have to make trade-offs. And those trade-offs will, between the several aims, is what makes the problem very difficult. Because depending on who you put more attention, you get a different sort of implication. And that's navigating these trade-offs that we need to consider. And say, one of the things that this may imply, for example, recognizing that we have this trade-off and linking to the previous talk by Sylvain, I just took note here, when it says that we have this idea of continuity, stability in concrete actions, actually I would add another one. I would add accept diversity across countries, in the sense that if different countries make a different trade-offs of these three aims, then it's natural that they will try to look for different solutions. And this, in the context of the European Union, have to be dealt with, how to accommodate diversity in the solutions, because you have a diversity of trade-offs. I don't have the answer, but I think it's an issue that should also be included. So this was a kind of a side comment on the previous talk. Just shows that as always, I listen carefully to what Sylvain says. Now, what is out there for discussion on these points? If you look a bit on what's been out there, you have managed entry agreements, which, in my own view, they have failed to live up to what was expected in the beginning when they started. But if you think on the economics behind it, it's actually natural that they have done as they have done, because they conceptually are there to address uncertainty. Okay, they are good to deal with price differences that are according to effective results in the population, but they do not address the issue of high prices due to market power. So they don't really go to the heart of the issues of affordability. So if we try to use managed entry agreements to deal with the affordability part, then you're going to go upwards to kind of volume limits or budget controls, and it's not really the role that they were created for. They are there to address uncertainty that and not really the issue of prices. Then you have sometimes discussions, and it's coming from time to time, the idea of cost-based prices. When you talk about it, we should have cost transparency so that we can have prices that are based on those costs. That actually, from an economic point of view, is not a good idea. It will not give you better innovation. It will get you basically higher costs, because if you are paying prices over costs, you're going to get costs to get price. And so it's not really a good idea. And over time, it will not even contribute to the idea of affordable prices, because you're going to get this rollover on the costs. So again, it may meet apparently one of the targets, but actually does not help on the other targets. Next slide, please. Then you have this net price transparency that was out in the World Health Assembly resolution in 2019. And again, here I took it and on the notion of disclosing prices and not just the process transparency. But then I wonder, how does it really affect each of the objectives? And the answer to that will be defined by the way prices in different markets will be linked to each other. And so it's not clear to me how several important economic elements will be addressed. Say, one that's typically difficult to live with in terms of public discussions is price discrimination. Price discrimination, from an economic point of view, is not necessarily bad for economic efficiency, and it may even benefit some of the consumers and may provide higher access, provided that you are able to take care of the effect on market power and the exercise of market power to get high prices. So, but then we should distinguish between having differential prices and what is the absolute level of prices. Those are two different things. And the second thing that's coming from the economic literature from many other fields is that actually confidential discounts are a form of competition on price. And so these notions of too much transparency can actually very easily over time give origin to higher prices, which goes against the affordable idea, even if in the moment where we introduce this transparency, given what exists already, you may have a beneficial effect. So we have an instantaneous effect and you have a dynamic effect. And it's not clear the dynamic effect will go on the direction that you want. So you need to understand better how really the competition unfolds in these areas and see what are the instruments that will be carried out. And so unless there is some coordination between payers, I don't think that this net price transparency will actually address the critical issue of market power that is critical for the affordability part. Next slide, please. Then we have also the trends on health technology assessment, economic evaluation, and value-based pricing approaches. Here, again, health technology assessment, economic evaluation will deal mostly with relative prices. We'll tell you what what products will have higher value than others. And this aims basically at different prices for different products. And then it may fail to deal with the market power issue. So it may go well with this idea of having innovation that matters because you are pricing better the ones that matter more, but you may fail to deal with market power. So you may fail to deal with the issue of the affordability. And so again, we have these trade-offs to go against each other, having targets going against each other. And so in the value-based pricing, which says that you should get prices equal to value, more or less, I'm simplifying. But if you just take too much of it, you're just putting prices upward in an almost institutional way. Okay, you get the differential pricing, but you get too high prices. So what we want to have is mechanisms that keep the information to get differential pricing, but they try to create the prices at a lower level. And I think that's where the trade-offs and the need for instruments comes in. Next slide, please. And so when I'm looking on this thing and trying to look into the future and look on these attempts in the past of trying to deal with these affordability elements, I think that we have to think about two main questions that we should always ask when discussing these mechanisms. The first of them is, how does the pricing rule influences the level of prices? Not just whether you pay more for the better products, but also what is the absolute level of prices. That was going to determine a lot on the affordability. And the second thing is, of course, to discuss how does the pricing rule influences the relative position of prices to have different, so to have innovation that matters being rewarded more. So we should split the questions about how those instruments work into what happens to the level and what happens to the difference in prices, so that you can address each of the targets and understand how each instrument addresses each of the targets. And next slide, please. So what are the ways forward on this? And here I have question marks, because if I had the ultimate truth for this, I've already been publishing it to everyone. So I don't have, at this point, a final answer. I don't have the silver bullet. Probably there is no silver bullet. As I said, maybe there's different countries have to find their own ways. But there are a couple of elements that we should think that could be a positive move and can help finding solutions. One of them is cost transparency to payers. And here the important element is not cost transparency, because cost transparency has been advocated several times in several places in the past. Here the critical word for me is to payers. Why does this make a difference? Because it can be information that is disclosed to the payers or to the reimbursement authorities, which can be treated, and that information can be treated as confidential commercial information. And that's not being publicly available, so it's not publicly available for competitors, it's not publicly available for anyone else. But at least the people or the entities that have to decide and negotiate and agree on prices to set up the payment mechanisms will have some idea about the margins that are being earned and how these margins differ between products and how these elements are present. I think this will be a valuable element for decision. The second element is how we use health technology assessment and economic evaluation. And here, my current status of thought, and if you have good arguments, I may change my views, but you need to have good arguments. It's to use this HTA and economic evaluation as a necessary but not sufficient condition for certain prices, also for certain ways of setting up the price, for certain mechanisms set up the price. So I would believe that in our future we'll have the issue of having. Can you just go back to the previous slide, please? I think that we should have the issue of using those mechanisms, economic evaluation and HTA, to be giving you the starting point of the process of negotiation, so that we should keep in mind that there's going to be a negotiation afterwards, and that so HTA and economic evaluation can rule out some products, but for the others, we should have a quick, should have some sort of negotiation. And so I think that we should have in mind that lower negotiation will be part of the future. So it's not going to be an issue that you get to find an automatic rule. I don't believe that an automatic rule will be the way that we can solve this issue. So because countries are different, because we have trade-offs that will be weighted different in different places, you're not going to be able to set an universal rule. The third element on the way forward is that many of these problems come out from the system that you have innovation rewarded. We tend to reward innovation nowadays by a patent system. And the patent system is great for a decentralized innovation process in which we don't know where the innovation is appearing. We don't know who is coming up with the ideas and developing them. So we just have a mechanism that rewards what comes about. Now, the critical question here is that if we have a clear unmet need, we can try to target it for an innovation process in a different way. Not reward with a patent, but reward with a different process. And I think that we should think carefully about that. If we know a clear unmet need that needs to be addressed, then instead of just giving a patent in the end and having a high price to reward that patent, then we should have a different type of process. And this addresses a bit what was mentioned before of moving the business model from blockbusters to niche kind of things. I think if we go with this unmet need approach and targeted research, we could have more of what the research that we need. And so I think that we should have mechanisms that go beyond the use of patents in certain circumstances. It's not meaning that we should trash and give away all the patents. No, not at all. But having one more instrument in our toolbox cannot harm, especially because if you have one more instrument, you may use it or may not use it. And so I don't think that it will be a good thing to develop new ways of thinking how to get target innovation. And of course, you could have other tools that we can use on this. And one of them which actually I'm kind of keen on for my training as economist, it was a little bit touched on the side by Sylvain's presentation, is to think more about the role of competition in market entry. And here I just think about a very simple exercise and say, every time that we are discussing a new product with a new price, should we make a small assessment of whether that price corresponds to exercise of market power? Is it well above what could be expected if there was no such specific circumstances of a patent with an insurance system that makes demand very rigid? So I'm just using a little bit of economic jargon, but say that this is going to be a technical component, but could be informative in the process. We should also explore nonlinear payment systems. As I said, having price differentials is not bad, but then we should know how to use it. And I think that we could think about multi-indication or multi-geography pricing, but we need to address again that market power concerns are addressed in those multi-indication processes. They have potential, but they need to be carefully done. So the potential to do wrong is also there, so it needs to be carefully addressed. And of course, joint negotiations by buyers is also a way to curb on market power, and I think that's probably something that we're going to see more and more into the future. Okay, so that's the gist of what I had to come to you, and so I am happy to discuss all these points. And so if I want you to remember a couple of things from this quick talk, is just say first, we have a crossroads for institutional design. we're going to need a new approach. It's not just not fine-tuning the arrangements. We need new tools. I hope that I convince you that there is a role for cooperation between countries in the direction of the moving in the moment that we move, and accepting that differences will be there. And importantly as well, recognize that there are market power issues, and we have to deal with it in a very open way, both at the institutional design level and at the operation level, using tools that at least reveal what is that exercise of market power. So this is with an economist view, probably less institution that would what you would expect. And thank you for your attention. I'll be glad to take any questions later on. Thank you. Back to you.
Pedro, thank you very much for your stimulating presentation and for bringing these new ideas. It's quite interesting that how we are converging in this the importance of new approaches, and also that the cooperation is something that we need clearly to address and make it meaningful. So we will certainly have some questions. I will leave the time for this. I will now give with pleasure the floor to Francisco Ramos. Francisco is currently head of the Red Cross Hospital here in Lisbon. He's also associate professor at the National School of Public Health. He has been Deputy Minister of Health until last year. He has been a member of the government in many occasions, always in the health sector, so that he knows very well. And is with pleasure I give the floor to Francisco Ramos. Francisco, the floor is yours to address your topic. Thank you.
Thank you, Rui. Good morning to all. Thank you very much for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here in this conference with such distinguished guests. It was quite nice to hear the previous presentations, and I will try to be quick to leave some time for the discussion that we must have ahead. We all knew that this time is quite heavy and complicated. It has lots of sharp points. So very important things were already said, and I just would like to go a little further behind and see, okay, this is not a new issue. How can we make affordable innovation? How can we make health systems affordable? We have a problem of the health expenditures, but can we expect to have enough money to develop the health sector? I would say yes. A few years ago, we spent 9%, the average of OECD, the rich part of the world, in healthcare, and the projection that we have to the end of this decade is a little more than 10%. So we are expecting to increase something like 10% in relative terms our wealth to be canalized to health care. So we are willing and expecting to spend more on healthcare. And we know that traditionally the health sector grows faster than the economy. Win in the economy means that the health sector is turning more and more important, but in political terms means the priority that our societies give to the health sector. But inequalities between countries persist, and inside countries also, and that is an issue. And that's something that we can see, for instance, looking at out-of-the-pocket payments that continue to be an unfair and important role. This issue of the inequalities can be seen when we look at the OECD information, the difference between health spending per capita or health spending share, a relation almost 1 to 10 in health spending per capita and I repeat, inside OECD countries, so we are talking only of the richest and developed countries in the world. Something that is important too is to understand that more and more the universal, the basic coverage of populations is accomplished in most of the countries. And with what is rising is supplementary or complementary coverage by voluntary private insurance. That means that once again, that people are available to pay more for health, and if the government, the political decision, it's not according to that, there are market issues in private insurance that can provide that coverage, that can provide that extra budget or extra money to make the health systems work. Once again, we know that there are huge differences even in the growth. So the path, we tend to say that the trend is always growing and growing, but the last decade showed that is not true. In some countries, the economic crisis was strong enough to make that true. It's not true. So with reductions in a few years. When you go to the pharmaceutical, and even in the considering the percentage of public expenditures, there are also huge differences between the countries. But most important, and what I now finally reaching to the pharma market, there are also very different behaviors in the recent years, being in the retail pharmaceuticals. Most countries are raising their expenditures, but also some of them contracting their expenses, like Portugal, Greece, or Denmark, quite different countries in terms of organization and health organization and the wealth. And almost the change of the market is going through the hospital market, which reflects the innovation process that I'm not going to develop. What are the issues that we are discussing and the further interventions explicit well? Are we willing to pay the cost, and which value are we getting from this innovation and this extra money we are putting in the system? There is efficiency issues, like Pedro said, but also affordability, or can we afford that issue? And are we getting the value that is promised by those costs? As far as we know, the HT process are the mechanism that we have to have some assessment of these issues. And for instance, reproducing the process in Portugal after reimbursement submission, how that evaluation should be made, of course, like in the general countries, assessing the relative effectiveness and the cost effectiveness. Getting also in consideration the issues of affordability. Can we have, there is a budget impact that is affordable or not in a longitudinal manner also. The issue of ethics, and the issue of ethics, it's more and more important as we are talking about the, I call it nano markets, there are other names, and of course, trying to make it compatible with health priorities, which is sometimes quite difficult to make it also a priority to be linked to health priorities. And finally, the one thing that must be developed a lot, that's more the monitoring process, controlling expenditures and the cost after the introduction on market. One of the things I would like to raise is the existence of clear rules how to make the HTA. In Portugal, we made it an actualization. We tried to improve an improvement of the rules 2 years, 1 year and a half ago. Still not tested. 2020 was not a good year to test anything but COVID and the response to the crisis. But something that could be fought in the European levels is also some kind of harmonization, or at least collaboration on getting similar rules. I not say so, exactly the same rules. One of Sylvain already exposed to that. We have, of course, problems on transparency, and that's quite important to not let fall down the issues of transparency, especially at European level. It's quite disturbing that we accept to have on this pharma market a complete non-transparent information and market on fixing of prices, compromise of keeping the secret on that issue, which is, I think, completely against the competition rules that are quite important to the existence of this common market and also with the political and social project of the European Union. The issue of the research support is something that also Pedro have mentioned, how to fund research, especially in those small markets. And I think that's also a quite important issue. In the last 15 years, we have the Innovative Medicines Initiative, but I think more tools must be developed and more cooperation must be studied and developed in order to have a clear and effective support to the research activities, which can be linked to the issue of transparency of costs and prices. And also, as it was said, these orphan drugs devoted to micro and nano markets are also a problem, especially if the intention is to get the same return as the full market drugs. Of course, there are some initiatives that are important at European level, the UNET to exactly increase the HTA methods and information, the horizon scanning to anticipate what is happening and to allow some collaborative work between authorities and companies. And about the COVID-19, this joint procurement of vaccines, I think it's a very good opportunity to develop the cooperation between countries. Lots of discussion will be made, but something that it seemed impossible, this pandemic showed clearly that it was possible. And as far as I understand, most of the criticism is now directed to the European Commission, but I think that's quite unfair. Of course, things were not perfect, but at least at this moment, what is clear, there is a difference in the capacity of the American industry and the European industry. And the American companies, until now, delivered what they promised, what was not possible to be made by the European ones. And that, I think, is the issue that must be dealt and faced in future developments. Finally, once again, implications after this COVID-19. This pandemic showed that it was possible to find extra money. And it was clear that well-designed public policy can be effective in improving health and showing that health system is resilient even in times of pandemic. So perhaps now in the economic crisis, it's hard to invest more in health in public terms, but clearly, once again, austerity is not a good solution. As the Marta Temido, the acting president of the European Council, said yesterday, Europe must perform as a leader, not as a follower. And that means that the pharma strategy is certainly a relevant tool, and we must work hard to get more transparency, more clear rules and effective on health, on HTA, and also a clear pathway to fund research and development in order to get better value at an affordable cost. Thank you very much for this opportunity, and also, of course, available to any questions that you people intend to put.
Thank you very much, Francisco, for your presentation. We had 3 very good presentations, and I think very stimulating. I hope they will also certainly contribute to the next session. I know that my colleague Marcel van Rij is certainly following this discussion, and so I will now open the floor for questions. I think I heard commonly in the 3 presentations aspects related to what I could call the architecture of dealing with affordability, also in terms of the tools we have and how we could improve them, and also in some specific issues, so the transparency, competition, research, also the issue of this let's say niche products, or that we may also call them one-shot products, but with high prices, probably for a lifetime. We don't know yet if this will be the case. So I will not take the time from me. So so we have a number of participants that also can intervene using so by speaking directly. Others can use the chat. I see that there are a number of questions on the chat, so probably I would select already some of these questions. So there is one on incentives, asking this is the first one for Sylvain. So in the aftermath of the COVID crisis, we are often trapped in discussion of national competence. The forum is important, but the incentives will work better. What will be your views? Then I think we have one I will mention, so then I will give the floor. Another one on a high-level forum, which includes pharmaceutical industry and patients, be the ideal setting for NCAP. As I said, we talked about architecture, and then I saw also one related to the position of the EU in relation to the vaccines and the interdependence of Europe with other global competitors. And I think there was also another one from Lidi Medus in relation to the repurposing of all drugs could be also an important source of innovative and affordable treatments, that this was discussed yesterday. Could non-profit developers be supported with public money? Perhaps by highlighting these different elements that these questions raise, I would make a round of a tour de table. So starting with Sylvain, and you pick up a little bit from these comments. Sylvain, please.
Yeah, thank you very much. I was very interested to hear what Pedro and Francisco said, and I think this is always very, very useful to hear those good advice or and recommendations based on facts and figures and information. So I think there is a lot to take from those presentations. I think that we can also take for the discussions that we want to continue with you, Rui, and the other colleagues in the competent authorities group. I mean, I took personally, I was very interested in, of course, what Pedro said about the importance of diversity, which is certainly something that is important, and also how we said this is not just about the diversity of the solution, it's also about the diversity of how we politically decide on trade-offs, and this is of course very important. It's a decision that needs to be taken at national level, but the way these decisions are taken nationally can also be discussed and informed, and there can be a lot of working together, not on the solutions themselves, but on how to get to solutions that are adapted to the national context and to the political decisions that are taken in the national context. Also, I think when it comes to transparency, I was I do agree very much with what was said by Pedro and also Francisco in relation to the transparency for the payers. It is for the authorities to be able to exchange information the way they want, to the extent that it helps and facilitate their own work on defining their willingness to pay, on defining their policy. Then, of course, I agree, and this is not something I mentioned in my input, but the link to cost effectiveness, the link to HTA, the link to measuring better and capturing better those aspects, and payment and reimbursement is very important. And one of the dimensions of the work that we want to reboost is also to ensure this conversation is taking place across authorities, across the life cycle, from the authorities in charge of supporting research financially, and in a way also designing the directions of the research, to the authorities in charge of assessing the safety, the efficacy, and market entry, to the authorities in charge of measuring cost effectiveness through HTA and other tools, to the authorities in charge of financing the system, reimbursing and monitoring the use, and so on. And it's this continuum in authorities at national level that are part of the same government or are working under the same government, but still probably working too much in silos. And this is this work in some countries like Portugal. There is an integration that is taking place, or that has taken place through the administrative structure. So there are countries that can probably also share experience that others could find useful. So this is an important also element to ensure this. Now, I'm not sure, Rui, there was a special question to me in relation to that from the chat, but I didn't see the chat. I'm not sure I can see the chat, so maybe you ask me, or if you think I was already too long, maybe we'll move on to the other colleagues, sorry.
Sylvain, perhaps, yes, we can also, some of them certainly will come to the round table. Yes, I suggest we do the round now. So, Pedro, there is also a question, perhaps I raise it in relation to the other types of incentives you mentioned besides IP. This is from Yanis Natsis, that is on the chat. Maybe you want to touch upon this on your intervention, Pedro.
Okay, so very quickly, just before I answer that question on the other incentives, a quick point just to stress and underline, put in bold, whatever you want to call it, what Sylvain just said, that we should have a common process, even if the diversity comes in the result. But the process of decision and the consistency of decision should be ensured across all the European Union countries. And that's a very different thing. One thing is to say that you have a different process. I don't agree with a different process. It needs to be a common process. But then think about to deal with different results that countries may have according to them. And so it's different results. When I mentioned accepting diversity, I should have stressed more. It's accepting diversity on the results and having common process being the same one, being the same guiding principles, being the same structure. Okay, that just probably was not clear enough. I really want to stress this point that Silvana has made. Now, on the other tools, well, basically the distinction I'm making here is that if we have a clear unmet need, and so we want to address a particular area, then we already have the target for the innovation. We know that part will matter. And if that's the thing, then we can think about using other tools to try to reach there. And does not need to be just waiting for someone to have a product that will receive a patent that will explore it in the usual way that we have in commercial for hundreds of years, and that has worked well. If you have a target thing, then it's better to say, okay, let's find a different way. It can be sometimes can be eventually setting a price or having a kind of a bidding contest, in the sense that you have several projects going on the same time, and you have midterm rewards, and only the best ones proceed until the end. Or you could have innovation procurement. You have a kind of a three-party agreement and try to get these aspects of trying to get something that in the end will be innovation that will not necessarily be subject to a patent process. And I think that we have to think more about using these other tools if we know exactly where we want to get. And when it was mentioned already here this morning, when I talk about non-profit people, non-profit developers being supported by public money, I think that was expression that was used by you some minutes ago. I think that will fit in these other ways of trying to get the innovation. It doesn't mean trashing other ways. It just means adding more ways. And I think that if we know what we want to get, then it's better to tell exactly what we want to get and try to get it. And that's now the critical question there is that doesn't this crowd out people that are other entities that could be independently trying to figure it out and will be rewarded through the patent system? The answer is, well, maybe it crowds out a bit, but it does not avoid that they can do it as well. It does not eliminate the possibility of having other people trying to get it and of having a reward through the traditional patent system. So, but if you as a payer or a group of countries as are a payer to have a clear target, they should work for that target in a more explicit way. And they should work in a way that eventually they retain the IP of that innovation that they have supported in a particular way. What happens if someone is actually able to develop independently and come up with a better product earlier? Okay, that's the risk of the business. Doing innovation procurement is not free of risk. And so I would think if you want to make competition, which is something that economists like, as you know, if you want to make competition to the extreme, you could say we could have even competition between modes of rewarding innovation. And that will keep many of the incentives that are there. I just don't want to be caught in the issue that only one mode may be there. And I think it's worth trying. It's not going to be easy. It's going to require cooperation between countries. Certainly, it's not a small country that can do that. Probably it's not even a large country alone can do it, but it's something that requires cooperation. Innovation is global, so you need to have a large player. So it needs to be something done at the European Union level, at least. Back to you.
Thank you, Pedro. I give now the floor to Francisco also to make a comment. Francisco, there were also two questions here in relation to whether the issue of affordability is driven by new latest medicines. Could you provide the share of the health spending that goes into these products? And also a question in the same area, your views on the impact of silo budgets on willingness to pay. I mean, I'm just mentioning this. Maybe you wish to give a comment as well.
Thank you. I will try to be brief. I will try to be brief again. We are passing 10. And just a comment on Pedro talk that he was saying, okay, this is a global issue. So will the European level be enough to address this? That's probably the question. But anyway, before that, I would say that there is probably plenty of room for an European intervention without keeping in question the issue of health as a member state issue. So an information review, something like the European semester on health, not with compulsory conclusions, but recommendations, and to split information, I think could be useful, especially in the next years when we understood that we cannot live alone without paying attention to our neighbors. The innovation, I think, is crucial, and the issue of the main problem of the small markets innovation is it's not it's not yet the dimension of it, but it's the source of the health expenditure increase and the expectation that if nothing is made, it is a big source of increase of expenditures, and with a big uncertainty of the results. That's the point. We have the costs for sure, and the benefits quite uncertain. So once again, I think that we must, and that I think it's impossible to be made at national level. That could be the input of European, to have new mechanisms to help and improve the research. We are needing, and that's not only in the pharma industry, but all type of industry, to reindustrialize Europe. It's not a consensual statement, but I think it's an important discussion to be made. I think it's clear now this year that we have good science in Europe, but we do not have good business pharma in Europe. So we must support, have policies to support, to develop this business, and continue to support and increase the science development, which in the last year reveals it's quite resilient and robust, contributing to the access to the vaccines that we are having now.
Thank you, Francisco. I'm afraid we have to move forward. I thank you very much for all the presentations. There was an important comment that I just wanted to highlight, and this is also that Silva brings it back, is that was in relation to the incentives, that they would not go only to, let's say, the profit sector, but also to the non-profit sector. This was related to the repurposing of medicines in terms of, this was a comment. And we have also a comment here that we need a bold decision to make change. So I think in a way we were all converging into the need to reinforce our collaboration. I think this is an important message I want to convey. I would thank you very much for this excellent presentation. I think this was a very good session, and I certainly this will support what is our intention also, to bring back the messages to the council conclusions that we will prepare. So this will be certainly embedded in this document. So thank you very much, Sylvain Giraud. Thank you very much, Pedro Pita Barros. Thank you very much, Francisco Ramos. I have here to close the session, but I will take 1 or 2 minutes just to profit of this occasion to present Marcel van Rij, who will moderate the roundtable that will follow with all the stakeholders to discuss collaboration and priorities for accessibility and affordability. So certainly this will be a good occasion to continue the discussion we started. So we will have national competence authorities, we'll have perspectives from the industry, we'll have perspectives from patients, from health professionals, and this will be certainly a rich debate we will have. Marcel van Rij is Director of the Pharmaceutical Affairs and Medical Technology in the Ministry of Health in the Netherlands, and Marcel has been very much involved in the discussions on the pharma policy, and he has been at the origins of the the Council conclusions of the Dutch presidency in 2016, which was certainly a very important document that was adopted at that time. So I would like to thank very much Marcel van Rijn on behalf of the Portuguese presidency, thank all the participants in the next panel for being with us, and I look forward to the next session. Thank you again to you all, and we break. I think we keep the 10 minutes break, and we rejoin afterwards. Thank you, and goodbye.